the first player that we've got the Buccaneers picking. And, I'm not exactly sold on Emmanuel Forbes only because I like bigger physical cornerbacks.
As do the Bucs.
As do the Bucs. At the same time, though, this team is just desperate for interceptions, Matt. They had 10 interceptions last year. As a former defensive back, that has got to be driving Todd Bowles crazy. And, Matt, what did we hear last offseason during the OTAs from Antoine Winfield, from cornerbacks coach Kevin Ross, from safeties coach Nick Rapone, yeah. From everybody that we heard, what was the mantra in the offseason?
It was all about
need to
get more turnovers, more interceptions. I mean, they had like a team bet between like the corners and the safeties who was going to have more interceptions, and they might as well just cancel the bets because no one was really obtaining the interceptions in the first place. I still remember talking to Kevin Ross at a press conference right around OTAs, the time you mentioned, and I said, Carlton Davis, coverage-wise, he's an all-pro. How close is he to being an all-pro? Do you think that he is? And he said he is if he could just get his damn hands on the ball more. Maybe said hands on the damn ball more. Yeah. But nonetheless, they knew the goal. They knew the objective. And how many times did we see Carlton Davis drop interceptions last year?
Oh, yeah.
How many times did we think that they turned the corner? Like after that first Saints game in week 2 when Mike Edwards had the pick 6, and then out of nowhere, it was just gone. The interceptions did not come back. So I do like go ahead.
Here's a crazy stat. You mentioned in that Saints game, there were 3 interceptions in that game. 2 by Jamel Dean, his only 2 of the year.
Yeah.
1 by Mike Edwards, which was a pick 6. And the week before, we had Antoine Winfield have an interception. So the Buccaneers in the first 2 weeks of the season had 4 interceptions, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
They had 6 the rest of the season. That's crazy, right?
Yeah, that's not ideal. And like the one interception Carlton did have, it came off of a tip.
Right.
I believe it was the Bengals game when he had the interception. Yeah, it came off a tip. So even he couldn't drop that one.
Right. So Jamel Dean, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Mike Edwards each had 2 interceptions. That was it. The Buccaneers didn't have any interceptions outside of their secondary. No linebackers, no outside linebackers. Shaq Barrett's had one before. Actually had a couple, I think, last year. But no interceptions outside of the secondary. So what you're going to get with a player like Emmanuel Forbes, he does need to gain some weight. He does need to be a better tackler. He needs to be a little bit more physical in the run. But the guy is an absolute interception machine. He had 14 career interceptions in 3 years at Mississippi State, including 5 as a starter opposite Martin Emerson, who, if you remember the Browns game, did a great job on Mike Evans. He was one of the players I really liked for the Buccaneers last year at the cornerback position. But Forbes had 5 interceptions, including 3 pick 6s as a freshman. And then in 2021, had 3 interceptions and a forced fumble. And then last year, 6 interceptions, including 3 more pick 6s. So this guy is just around the ball, kind of like he's got some Rondé Barber-esque just ability to be where the ball is. Now, sometimes that doesn't always matter, right? Because if you look at Zion McCollum, he had plenty of interceptions too at Sam Houston State.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen him really amount to anything yet. He had a very challenging rookie year on the defensive side, played well in special teams as a gunner, but he really has to develop. It's a big jump, right, from Sam Houston to the NFL. Forbes, he's gone up against LSU wide receivers, Georgia receivers, Alabama receivers, and he's not a finished product. His frame's going to remind you a little bit of Sauce Gardner, just in terms of his skinniness and lankiness. Not as tall. He's only 6 foot. But the guy does have some ball skills. He's a good zone corner. He can anticipate, read, and break on the ball. He's got good speed. And I know that Mississippi State has produced the likes of Jonathan Banks before and a couple others that haven't panned out.
I liked the comparison you made to Jonathan Banks, obviously a former player in Tampa Bay. And I do, just looking at him, the one thing, I love the turnovers. I mean, you have to love the amount of turnovers. And it's one thing when you're doing it in the SEC for Mississippi State like he did. It's another when you're in the division that Zion McCollum was in.
Right.
But because of that lankiness and the size, I'm not saying I don't like him and I like his athleticism, But it's one of those things where I think he might almost. It's not going to be a redshirt year, obviously, if you're a first round pick, but just like the second year is where you're really going to see the true improvement when he's able to like bulk up physically. Maybe we'll say the same thing about Logan Hall, different position, obviously, but he needs to get bigger. So that's like kind of the one thing that stands out for me with Forbes. Ton of interceptions, but maybe year 2 is when you really see the return on the investment.
Yeah, I agree.